Louis Theroux is arguably one of the best documentary makers in the world, with a career spanning over 2 decades of on-the-ground investigative journalism, discovering the weird and difficult subjects of the world. Now, out of the vast catalogue of Louis Theroux's work, one documentary has always eluded him. When asked if there was a film he's made that he wishes he could go back and do differently, he stated, "You know, I wish I could go back now, knowing what I know now, and confront Jimmy Saville. You know, while he was alive, while I was making the programme. I think we'd all, as a society in Britain, it would have been massively healthier, more sultry for his victims and wider community to see him having his face in court, an investigation, the consequences of what he'd done. But sadly, I was never able to do that. In order to understand how and why this documentary shaped Louis's life forever, we need to go back. Louis was born in Singapore on the 20th of May 1970 to Anne, who was British, and Paul Theroux, an American travel writer. Raised in South London from age 1, he attended the prestigious schools Tower House and Westminster, where he mingled with future creatives like Adam Buxton and Joe Cornish. From 1988 to 1991, Louis studied modern history at Magdalene College, Oxford, earning a first-class honours. Soon after, he moved to the US, writing for Metro Silicon Valley and Spy magazine before transitioning to TV as a correspondent on Michael Moore's TV Nation. From here, the BBC would offer him a development deal in the late 90s. This would see Louis create a documentary series for the BBC that would be a long-form extension of his correspondent work on TV Nation. This series would be called Louis Theroux Weird Weekends.
2 seasons of TV Nation, I realised, okay, there's something in this, and I was signed to a development deal by the BBC, and one of the ideas I came up with was in essence a sort of long-form version of the segments I'd been doing, covering similar terrain, far right, religious weirdness, and also some other terrain, but to do it sort of at 50 minutes length and with more heart and more immersion and more emotional connection, because I think what happened was I realised I can't just be poking fun for 50 minutes. It'll get really old and really tiresome. And so I remember sitting down with my series producers, David Mortimer, and saying, look, there has to be some emotional connection here for it to work.
Following Weird Weekends, Theroux launched another show titled When Louis Met, which consisted of 60-minute features spotlighting British celebrities. However, in April 2000, an episode with Jimmy Saville would unknowingly change Louis's life forever. You see, at the time in the UK, there were always echoes and rumours of Jimmy Saville's private life, but no one ever said anything because of fear of fame and how well connected the bloke was. Even if you did speak out about him, like the Sex Pistols' Johnny Rotten did during a BBC interview in 1978, they won't broadcast it, no one believes you, or it just gets covered up. So going into this interview, one of Louis's motives in making the documentary was that he believed that Jimmy had a secret. It was a significant get, as Saville rarely gave interviews, let alone allow filmmakers into his personal life. What resulted was a documentary that is chilling to watch in hindsight. Theroux approached the project with his trademark disarming awkwardness and understated questioning. As filming progressed over the weeks and months, Louis was surprised by the level of commitment Jimmy had to the documentary, considering his status of celebrity. Working long hours, staying overnight in a caravan in Scotland, and letting Louis sleep in his dead mother's bedroom. From his first day spent with Jimmy, Louis could sense that he enjoyed the fact that no one knew about his private affairs. However, he still probed gently into the oddities of Saville's isolation, his inability to form close relationships, his flippant and contradictory statements about women, and his love of control.
Friends that are girls, 8 million.
Yeah.
Friends that are girls, yeah, but girlfriend in the sense of today, i.e. you are together, you don't bother with anybody else, etc. No, never.
Not even for like a week?
No, not even for a week.
Knowing he was running out of time, on one of the last days of filming the documentary, Louis asked Jimmy about the rumours of him being a pedophile.
So tabloids don't, pursue this whole isn't he a paedophile line, basically?
Yes. All right. How do they know whether I am or not? How does anybody know whether I am? Nobody knows whether I am or not. I know I'm not. So I can tell you from experience that the easy way of doing it, when they say, oh, you have all them children, Jim will fix it. I say, yeah, I hate them.
Yeah. To me, that sounds more sort of suspicious in a way.
Hard luck.
Because it seems so important.
But that's my policy, that's the way it goes.
What stands out now is how close Theroux came, yet how far he remained from the truth. The documentary portrays a man who is deeply uncomfortable with intimacy, obsessed with image, and controlling to a pathological degree. But there was no smoking gun, no confession, just a thick fog of something off, something hidden in plain sight. After the documentary was released, Louis felt a degree of gratitude towards Jimmy for the effort that he put into it, leading them to keep in touch. However, a few weeks after the documentary aired, in the year 2000, Louis received a letter from two women who described themselves as girlfriends of Jimmy Saville.
We watched your TV program with great interest. It's a shame in your research you didn't find us and ask us some questions about Jim. We could have directed you as to how to tackle him and what to ask. Contrary to what Jim would like you to believe, Jim did have a lot of girlfriends, not girls that were just friends. We were two of them. All Jim's girlfriends knew each other. There was never jealousies. We're all enormous friends to this day.
Louis subsequently went to meet them in London for tea, where he was left confused. The now grown women still held affection for Jimmy despite the actions being criminal, leaving Louis to question if it was symptomatic of a bygone era, the showbiz world of the 60s and 70s. In 2001, Jimmy went to visit Louis at his office at the BBC for a short follow-up documentary. According to Louis, he was dressed inappropriately and was borderline creepy to everyone. However, Louis partly believed that it was part of his comedy persona. In this short follow-up conversation, Jimmy explained how he deals with unwelcome attention from the tabloids.
They don't care whether it's right, wrong, true, false, as long as they've got names, baby. They'll have a feast. Say, for instance, you were interviewing me on an allegation of something that was not nice, right? And you said to me, you are alleged to have dum-de-dum-de-dum. My answer would be, it would be a lot worse if it were true.
Well, they do say no smoke without a fire, don't they?
In the next 2 years after his documentary, Louis visited Jimmy 3 or 4 times up in Leeds for professional reasons, recording for DVD inserts or doing press for shows, waiting to see if the mask would drop. After Saville's death in 2011, a flood of allegations emerged. Victims came forward en masse, describing decades of abuse. Many incidents occurred in hospitals, BBC studios, and even while Saville was supposed to be fundraising for children's charities. An official inquiry would later identify over 450 victims. For Louis, this was a moment of profound reckoning. In interviews and writings since, he's expressed deep remorse, not for failing to expose Saville, but for trusting him too much, for not pushing harder, for accepting too much on Saville's terms. In an interview with The Guardian, Louis stated, "I didn't at the time, when making the program, know him to be a sex offender or sexual predator. I'd heard rumours, but so had a lot of people, and it always seemed to me that the rumours were extremely pervasive. It wasn't a BBC thing. I'd been hearing them since my mid-teens. It may be that there were so many rumours that they almost had a paradoxical effect of making one disinclined to take them seriously, but it is a source of regret that I couldn't do more to expose him while he was alive." That belief that Saville was an eccentric, not a predator, was a fatal misjudgment shared by many. On the 2nd of October 2016, Theroux revisited his time with Saville in a documentary titled Saville. This new documentary would explore less about Saville himself and more about the aftermath, about understanding the nature of deception, manipulation, and denial. Theroux revisited key figures from his original documentary, including people who had known or worked with Saville. He spoke to survivors, BBC insiders, and friends who later came to terms with their own complicity or silence. Louis covered his entire journey of what he thought he knew about Saville, their relationship, and confronting his own footage, seeing scenes that once seemed innocuous in a new, darker light. In the documentary, Louis spoke to one of Saville's victims who gave her opinion on what she thought of Louis' original documentary with Jimmy.
My actual reaction was along the lines of, poor Louis. He's really, really been hoodwinked here. Sorry. Sorry. It's an awful thing to say.
No, it's good to hear that.
Louis also interviewed Jimmy's PA of 28 years, who said she laughed at Louis' original documentary because Louis believed that he actually slept in the camper van overnight, hinting at his naivety at the time. But this interaction ultimately underlined how Jimmy used everyone he knew and interacted with, projecting whatever he wanted you to believe. Later on, Louis spoke to another victim where she claimed that at the time she was watching the original documentary, she was extremely annoyed and believed that Louis was extremely gullible.
Having said that, you watched the documentary that I made in 2000.
Yes, I did watch that.
And so what did you, what's the feeling?
I was just really, really annoyed. I was like fuming. I just thought, oh, silly chap, he doesn't know what goes on, he doesn't know. So gullible, you know.
You felt that I was gullible and silly?
Oh, yeah. You were young, yeah, and he was like, I'm the celebrity, I'm big, you know, and then that just came over, that he was manipulating things.
What has been difficult is realizing that I failed to get to the truth about him, and that I wasn't able to do more to kind of bring him to account.
Later on in the documentary, it was also revealed that the women who wrote to Louis in the year 2000, after his original documentary aired, had been one of the many victims interviewed for the BBC's inquiry that was published late in 2012. This was tough for Louis, as he discovered that he spoke to 2 victims while Jimmy was still alive, and couldn't help feeling like he could have potentially done more to connect the dots.
They'd come forward amid the tsunami of revelations to say that their relations with Jimmy Saville had been abusive.
That was sort of the closest I got to getting the truth, but at the time that I met them, they were still describing themselves as his friends. But I feel as though if they'd been more able to speak out at that time, I could have done more to bring out the truth while he was alive.
The documentary wasn't notable for any shocking new revelations, but for its tone of sincere introspection. Louis doesn't try to exonerate himself. He asks hard questions of himself. Was he too naive? Did he get too close? Should he have listened harder when Saville made off-color jokes or disturbing comments? Louis has since written and spoken extensively about the guilt he feels regarding his interaction with Saville. In his memoir, Gotta Get Through This, he describes how he tried to maintain journalistic distance while also enjoying the access Saville granted him. He now sees this access as a trap. He's also spoken candidly about how good people can end up being part of a system that enables predators through inaction. Probably one of the most sobering lessons Theroux drew from this experience is that a predator can both be charismatic and manipulative, and can thrive in plain sight when people are afraid to challenge them. On the 20th of October 2020, 4 years after his second Saville documentary, Louis revealed why he felt he needed to go back and revisit the story.
I don't know how thought through it was in one level. I was just aware that I had this rather bizarre situation in which a profile that I'd made of an eccentric aging celebrity who appeared to have secrets, but undefined secrets, had become the most in-depth TV portrait of Britain's most notorious offender, 15 years, I suppose, after I'd made it. And the alchemy, or the strange act of transformation by which that took place, I thought was, represented a huge shift in both how we understand assault, our ability to hear the voices of victims. In a small way, I suppose I felt that I had to take account of myself and how it was that I had not managed to show more of him. I'm very much sort of on the horns of I'm very torn on this, because on one level I'm really proud of the original show, and I feel it showed more than anyone else had while he was alive. On another level, I'm aware that we missed this vast secret that he had, and a little part of me feels disappointed with myself that he agreed to do this documentary with me. At some level, he must have known that he had these secrets, and that he saw me, he sized me up and thought, you know what, I can give this guy 2 weeks or 3 weeks of access and make a documentary about me, and I'm not too worried that he's going to uncover the fact that I'm a predator. In a sense, in that calculation, he was correct, which is rather galling. But by going back, I thought I could, this may sound really pompous, but I read a lot in Holocaust literature. Authors like Primo Levi, Gita Sereni attempts to understand the worst crimes in the annals of humanity. And what's always struck me is that they're most powerfully told when they're told in the most sort of nuanced and unemotional and matter-of-fact way. For me, that's Primo Levi's great gift as a writer, was his ability to see all the complexity, the moral complexity of the nature of suffering and evil. The way in which suffering doesn't actually ennoble its victims. In many ways, it's a corrupting process by which those people who abused and misused become dragged down into the iniquity. And by the same token, in a tiny way, I hoped that that this sort of national crime that's taken place would lend itself to a treatment that was just very, very matter of fact, that didn't over-emotionalize it. There was an attempt to understand in an honest way how we were all, and myself in particular, taken for a ride, taken in, gulled by this character.
Underneath this interview, commenters stated, "His faux naivety usually allows his subjects to drop their guard. It's a great mechanism, but Saville was far too pathologically manipulative to undone by such a trick. Louis is a smart cookie. I bet he kicks himself over this." Saville was so confident because he knew he was protected by lords, politicians, and powerful men who did some of the foul things with him. If the sheep befriends the wolf, it's eat or be eaten. In Louis' 2019 autobiography, he also explained that his former wife told him that there was nothing real about him, and during an interview promoting this book, Stephen Bartlett noted it was in a similar vein to Jimmy's criticism of Louis, where he stated, "Insincerity is his specialty."
I remember where we were, like when the Jimmy Saville, the first documentary I made about Jimmy Saville when he was alive, when Louis met Jimmy. I remember when we promoted it, he agreed to do an interview to promote it, and part of that was a profile interview in The Guardian, and he was interviewed at King's Cross in the hotel there, in one of the hotel rooms, and the guy from The Guardian came down. I don't even know why it came up, but I made a joke and he said, "Insincerity, your speciality. Gosh, you asking me to get inside the mind of Jimmy Saville to think about what he meant when he criticized me?" I think he thought that, I think that journalistic role where, I think you know what it is like the best, there's two constructions I can put on that. One is just that in journalism, you're sort of required to inhabit this place of intimacy, like, hey, let's do this and let's do that, and then afterwards you sort of disconnect, and sometimes that can feel jarring. I don't think actually that's what he meant though. Like, I think maybe in some cases there's a part of journalism that can feel slightly sort of transactional, where you're like, let's bro down on location and have fun, and yet if you looked at it dispassionately, it's slightly cynical and calculating. It's like, well, you're doing this for a TV program, and so there's a part of that slightly feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think really what he was talking about there was a sense of humor. He was calling out my sense of humor, which is sometimes an aspect of it which sometimes involves almost self-parody, like an element of where you say something as a way of sort of parodying or satirizing your own. This isn't going to make any sense, Steve, but you satirize your own worst impulses. Like, the best example I can give is when I said to when I was with Neil and Christine Hamilton, right? I did a program and they were accused of and while I filmed with them, and then it would become media circus, and I carried on filming, and then they did a deal with the Mail on Sunday to sell their story, and I was interviewing them during all of this, and I said to Christine, "How much did the Mail on Sunday pay for you for the interview?" I was just curious, because I knew probably they got 10 or 15 or 20,000 pounds, and I was just curious. And Christine said, "I'm not going to tell you." And I said to Christine, "This is me. I'm not a journalist. I'm a friend. Like, you can tell me." And a lot of people gave me shit for it, right? Like that, what I said. But in my mind, like, that was a funny thing to say, because quite obviously I am a journalist, and whether I'm a friend or not is actually not established. I'm not clearly not a friend, but I'm not also clearly a friend, right? So that was kind of a funny remark, because I was being nakedly insincere, which is fun. Like, sometimes to me, what's funny is saying, sort of saying the wrong thing, saying the thing that's sort of brazen, as a way of just sort of identifying the hypocrisy and having fun with it. So I tend to think that's what Jimmy Saville meant, was that sometimes I would say things that were kind of definitively either untrue or quite clearly being said because they were not clearly true. Anyway, that's way you asked that question. And when you ask a question about Jimmy Saville, I'm going to give you a long answer because it's easy to be misconstrued, but I think that's what he meant.
Theroux's relationship with Saville has become a cultural touchstone in Britain, a cautionary tale about celebrity trust and journalism. His documentaries are now studied in media and journalism courses as case studies in ethical responsibility, the limits of access journalism, and the dangers of misplaced trust. The British public, for the most part, didn't turn on Louis. Many saw him as the embodiment of their own failure to see the truth. His willingness to own up to his mistakes, to revisit the work with humility and openness, helped preserve his reputation as an honest documentarian and full-time legend. Since the Saville revelations, Theroux's work has changed subtly but significantly. He now approaches interviews with more suspicion, more emotional sensitivity, and a deeper awareness of power dynamics. In later projects like Dark States or A Night in Question, he focused more on systems of abuse, trauma, and institutional failure. His tone became more somber, more reflective, and more aware of the psychological weight his subjects carry. The Saville experience marked a shift from quirky immersion to something deeper, investigative empathy rooted in emotional accountability. Theroux's relationship with Saville was in many ways a microcosm of a nation's relationship with celebrity culture. It revealed how abusers weaponize access, how institutions crumble under weight of complicity, and how difficult it is to speak truth to power when power is wrapped in benevolence. Ultimately, Louis Theroux's ongoing willingness to confront his misjudgment has allowed him to grow, not just as a filmmaker, but as a person. His journey not only serves as a reckoning with one of the UK's darkest scandals, but also a guide for how to navigate the morally fraught terrain of journalism, truth, and trust. Thank you so much for watching this video, it really does mean a lot to me. Make sure to follow me on all of my socials at Phat Mema, like, subscribe, and comment below what you want to see next.